And I am addressing you at the end of the Gorton and Denton by-election. A phenomenal victory for the Greens, but most importantly, a shattering defeat for Reform and the Labour Party. Just think about it. Labour have scored over 50% in Gorton and Denton at the last general election in 2024. Now they fall third place behind Reform and the victorious Green Party. What does this tell you about the legitimacy of Starmer's leadership over Labour? But most importantly, what does this tell you about the electoral prospects of the Labour Party and its legitimacy as the ruling party in Britain? This is an existential crisis for Labour, and this is just the appetizer to what we are about to see at the next general election. From Runcorn and Helsby to the Welsh Senedd to Gorton and Denton, we are seeing Labour fall, not just across the Red Wall, but across the entire country. That is what is at stake. Now, beating Labour and Reform is an electoral priority for us, especially given this war that we are now involved in with Iran. More on that later. Labour's struggle to appease both camps, the old Conservative voters who are now going to Reform and the young artsy leftists who are going with the Greens, has led Labour to fall out of favour with both camps. Keir copied the response of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak after George Galloway's monumental victory in Rochdale, dismissing all dissenting voters as extremists. Well, that worked out well for the Tories, didn't it? So that is what we'll be discussing. We'll also be discussing Matt Kennard's prescription that we all go and join the Greens. Is that the answer? We have no doubt about Matt Kennard's ability as a phenomenal journalist, a man who has done an immeasurable service in exposing imperialist war crimes. But we need to unpack that a little bit further. Now, for the big news, the big enchilada, as George Galloway would say, is the invasion, the bombing of Iran, the death of Ayatollah Khomeini, the total destabilization of that region. Have you noticed energy prices going up? Well, you will do, seeing as we import most of our natural gas, most of our gas from Qatar. Qatar has dealt with phenomenal bombing. This has directly impacted our import of gas, escalating prices to 93%. The world price has gone up by 50%, but in Britain specifically, it will be 90%. And what is Keir Starmer doing about it? If I was in his shoes, I would start by at least scrapping net zero and the Climate Change Act to get those prices down. Starmer, it is time to show leadership. Our people are already suffering in this cost of living crisis, and it will get monumentally worse. You thought that this was just it after the death of the Ayatollah. I don't know if you saw the videos on social media, the hundreds of thousands of people gathered on the streets. What I saw is tens of millions, if not just millions, of Khomeinis in waiting. People who are willing to lose life and limb to defend their country's sovereignty from imperialism. To decapitate a leadership is one thing, but to occupy it, to subdue that country is another thing. The Iranians are looking very closely at what is happening in Venezuela. The United States strategy in dealing with dissident countries is to decapitate the leadership and attempt to co-opt the government incoming. And that is exactly what they are doing in Venezuela. That is why the Venezuelans are making the unprecedented backslide to privatizing their oil industry in the interests of US corporations. The Iranians are looking at this very closely. And they are playing two strategies. On the one hand, it is to bomb Israel and the traitor Gulf countries that have betrayed humanity, betrayed the Palestinian cause, and have signed the Abraham Accords. And not only that, but Iran has decentralized command to individual commanders. They have insulated their army from decapitation. And with that, it is going to be just like the Iraqi resistance, different centers of command prepping for a people's war against imperialism. That's my monologue. Let's roll the video and unpack this all. Apologies for the latter part of the monologue. The comment section distracts me, and then I kind of just lose my bearings. But welcome all. The X space is now open, so we will be taking contributions from the floor. I think we'll discuss the Gorton and Denton by-election first. Naturally, a monumental victory for the Greens. I think what we need to focus on talking about here first, chaps, is we need to discuss Matt Kennard's... yeah, you did distract me. It's all good. Matt Kennard's... I'm getting some feedback. Yeah, you did distract me. It's all good. If we could just all mute. There we go. Yeah, it's a bit of feedback. So let's start by talking about Matt Kennard's recommendation that we all pack up and we join the Green Party. Now, my position is this, is that it's not so much an alliance, but it's a non-aggression pact. What I suggest, and what I've been suggesting for a while now, is an electoral pact with your party and the Green Party for no other reason than to block the rise of reform and to smash the Labour Party, smash its links with the unions. This does not have to involve making such a political compromise as joining the Green Party, especially now with the situation in Iran. And surprisingly, the more I've prepped for this stream, the more that the events in Iran and the events in Gorton and Denton and just British politics in general are very intimately linked. What I expect with this oncoming energy crisis that is the result of the war in Iran, the policy of the Greens is going to be much less palatable with ordinary people, people who are going to, working class people who are going to be the first to suffer the brunt of this war.
Can you go again?
Hey?
Can you go again? I missed.
What? Could you not hear me?
No, I had some issues, some technical issues.
My point is that we need a pact with the Greens in your party to block reform and smash the Labour Party. But we shouldn't join the Greens. It's too much of a political concession. And in spite of all this, the Greens platform is going to be much less palatable to working people, especially with the oncoming energy crisis that will result from this war with Iran.
Yes, I think so. With regard to the Greens and what you're saying about their platform, there's a big discussion going on about how they should be engaged with, right? I think we have on the one hand the Green Party that is, yes, I mean, they put out a decent statement regarding the war in Iran. Zach Polanski has been acting in a decent way. He's mentioned the fact that Iran was attacked and brutally attacked by the forces of imperialism. And at the same time, we have, it's difficult because the Green Party at the same time represents only the interests of sort of a more liberal, or not the interests, but the views of a more liberal urbanite section of the British population. And I think our job is to square that with their approach on Iran, praise them when they take good stances, but at the same time point out the problems of said views. I guess a way of doing it would be bridging the Iran war stance to then address it to a more the working class strata of the British population.
I think we really have to be careful, because I think there's a very obvious at the moment state coordinated push to present the Green Party as the answer. Like, we know Labour's going to be on the way out. The ruling class is going to need another progressive face of capitalism that it can suck all of our energy into. So like you said, people like Matt Kennard, who is a very decent journalist, is nevertheless completely hypnotized by Zach Polanski, right? And he's joined the Green Party, and he's telling other people to join the Green Party. But it's our responsibility, whatever the electoral pact, and I agree that we should be flexible, or the Workers' Party should be flexible with its electoral relationships and its electoral strategy and all of this, to maximize the number of Workers' Party candidates that actually get elected, right? That's our absolute priority. That's the only thing we should be interested in electorally. But we should never be confused about what the Green Party are or what they represent, which is, they are representatives of this kind of social democratic, liberal capitalist framework. Their anti-war positions are very inconsistent, and you don't have to peel the onion very far to actually see that they're a very pro-war party. They had very imperialist positions, obviously, against Russia. There's been a lot of European capitalists who have had cold feet about the bombing of Iran. I don't think that's because they're good people. I think it's because they can see that it's an absolute shit show, and Trump's kind of gone off on one, and it's not going the way he expected. We've had people on, I think we had high-ranking members of the military going onto LBC and saying they weren't sure about this. They didn't think that it was a good idea. They didn't think the war was going well. This isn't something that happened with Iraq or with Afghanistan. So, we should absolutely, it is our responsibility, especially us as a kind of communist Marxist-Leninist voice, to be showing people this isn't a socialist party which is just woke and hung up on identity issues. This is a pro-war imperialist party whose record of being actually in whether local government or in Scottish government in the coalition with the SNP has been one of just carrying on the austerity agenda and folding on all of their so-called positions.
I think perhaps I phrased it badly. What I was trying to say was that yes, the Greens are absolutely an imperialist bourgeois formation. Nonetheless, one that is at the moment supported by at least 20%, according to most polls, of the British population. And, a victory in Gorton and Denton is not insignificant. It shows that even sort of a more formally industrial, but nonetheless maybe forgotten areas of the, or left behind areas of the country, they still have a certain appeal. And yes, our job is to expose the Greens in a way, but at the same time, we need to think very carefully about the way we do it. And when I said the word bridge was, you know, they at the moment are voicing anti-war views, and yes, they might have their own sort of hidden motivations. But it is our job to bridge those, to bring those views, and then give them sort of new, a new reasoning, you know, because they might be anti-war because, you know, it's a war is bad, you know, whatever they can, whatever ideas they can pull out of their backsides. But we could, you know, we bring those anti-war arguments back and actually link it to the material needs of the British people and say, this is not, you know, benefiting you. And at the same time, we can approach the Greens in such a way that they'll be stronger in certain areas. And if our job is to, you know, supersede the Labour Party, bring down the Labour Party, as sort of the party which still has in a way legitimacy in the British working class as the party of Labour. That's its history, right? Then we need to think tactically about how we engage with the Greens, sort of electorally and constituency wise.
Before we go on any further, guys, can I just ask that we all individually, are we all on X? Sami, you're on X, aren't you?
Yes.
Great. Armani, are you two on X? Because I think what we need to do is just join the X space so that people can hear us, because they're not hearing me through your microphone. And Dave, my most loyal follower on these X streams, as even he's left. And like, even if I was like chatting shit, he'd still be on there. He's that fucking loyal, and I don't want to lose him. So can we just take a moment to make sure that we are all on the X space, and I'll just write out a tweet just saying we fixed it. I'll just repost that.
Yeah, I just requested to speak on the X space.
Okay, cool. Hang on.
While you're doing that, can I come back in a bit on the Gorton and Denton?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think Sami's I think you're misrepresenting what kind of happened in Gorton and Denton. It wasn't some kind of you know, the working class is all jumping to the Green Party and they've all decided, like, you know, this is an electoral.
Eben, just request to speak on the X space so people can hear you.
Okay. I've requested.
Okay, cool.
So coming back on.
Hi, Ashley, how you doing?
Oh shit! Hang on. Sorry, Dave. I think I gave you permission to chat, but I shouldn't have let you. Hang on. Eben, go ahead, mate. Just unmute yourself on the space.
Hang on.
And now my screen's frozen. Fuck's sake.
Right, I've requested again if you want to.
Okay, good. You're back on.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So going back to the kind of Gorton and Denton strategy, I think we need to unpick what actually happened there, which is that working class people were not voting for the Greens. It's just empirically not true. Gorton and Denton is a split community. It's a very Muslim. There's a high Muslim South Asian population, especially in Gorton, right? While Denton is this more like white working class area, right? Now, reform is really strong among the white working class communities, right? The kind of the working class base, which communists should be very interested in, right? We want to be winning them over. The Green Party, what they focused heavily on was the kind of anti-racist message and the kind of you know, community empowerment message or whatever. So they were very focused on the Gorton side, and they had a very high Muslim vote. What the reform guy Matt Goodwin did is he really alienated. Armani, can you mute yourself?
Yeah, we're just getting some feedback. I'm just going to mute Armani. I've got to mute you, man, because we're just getting some serious feedback on your end. So what was I saying? So in Denton, you had this white working class community which has been kind of voting for reform, but Matt Goodwin, he did just a terrible electoral campaign, and he was leaning into the Gorton side and trying to win them over, while at the same time kind of alienating the Denton side. So what happened at the end of it was there were a bunch of reform voters who would otherwise have voted reform who were alienated from it. So the reform vote was lower. They weren't voting green. They absolutely were not voting green. But the Greens were able to use that failure to catapult themselves in front because they had done that work appealing to the South Asian community. So you have this kind of liberal left versus conservative right strategy, which we should be disagreeing with and exposing, right? You shouldn't just be appealing to South Asians or Muslims. You shouldn't just be appealing to white working class people. What we really need to be doing is bringing these different communities together around class issues, right? That's where parties like the Workers' Party need to be coming in. That's where communists need to be coming in. But we shouldn't confuse the Green Party's success in Gorton and Denton for some kind of viability to take government, because they're always going to be relying on just a middle class vote to get there.
Yeah, I don't think we have any fundamental disagreement. All I was simply saying, well, in probably a worse way than you just did, is that, when we talk about the Greens' position on the war on Iran, for example, and how that does not benefit the British worker, you need to use that in a way that brings those two different demographics together, right? Whether it's the Muslim vote or the white working class vote, they both need to recognize, the Muslims may have, the Muslim community may have their own reasons for not supporting the war on Iran, but at the same time, we need to find a way of bringing that same sort of sentiment to the more white British working class, and how it doesn't benefit them to. Because, for example, Reform is the one that's now claiming that, Keir was putting pressure on Starmer that they should have been the bases should have been allowed to be used, and so through this kind of like anti-imperialist rhetoric, we can grab the sort of more white working class Reform voters.
I think it's fine. It's just, I think if you lean too much towards the Greens, and if you're not doing enough to expose the Greens, ordinary working class people, I think they are so class conscious, and they can see it like blatantly that the Green Party doesn't represent their interests, blatantly. So when they then hear socialists and communists saying, no, this is a progressive force, no, you should be voting for them, no, you should be supporting the Greens, that's very alienating. And then they will go towards the parties which are saying, no, this doesn't represent your interests, no, this is part of the mainstream, and that's obviously going to be Reform, or it's going to be Restore Britain. So yeah, and we have to kind of understand that the Green Party aren't opposing, the bombing in the Middle East out of the interests of the working class, right? Or the interests of the Muslim communities or whatever. They're opposing it because, to be honest, destabilization of the Middle East hurts capitalist interests in some ways. In other ways, it helps capitalist interests, but it depends on what kind of faction you're representing. This is just all the stuff we have to kind of
I think we agree.
see through. Armani, do you want to come in? Do you want to talk a bit about the Greens over in Germany?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hold on. Do I need to join the X Space?
No, I think I might actually just pull the plug on the X Space, because it's just been a total fucking disaster. To be honest, I think I need to go back to the drawing board of the X Space, if I'm being completely honest with you. I am just gonna. I mean, I've put it on to everyone now, so if, I've loosened, so I don't need to bring people in. Yeah, just go on my Twitter, because I've opened up a new one where everyone can just chip in, so it might be a bit anarchic, but I might be making a terrible mistake here.
Okay. But can the Twitter people hear me? Because I
Well,
don't think they
you're
can.
not on the X Space. I mean, no, we are live on Twitter as well, but do you know what? I'm going to pull the plug on this X Space completely because it's just
Can the
been a
people on Twitter
disaster.
hear me, or can you guys just only?
Yeah, do you know what I'm gonna? Yeah, I'll tell you what I'm gonna do.
Because I'm not sure now.
Well, you're on it now.
Whatever. I'm just gonna talk. So I don't know much about the Greens in Britain, but I can say that the Greens in Germany are like when Lenin talked about labor aristocracy, he talked about a small part of the working class that is bought by the imperialists, and I think the Greens in Germany, people who vote for them, are part of this labor aristocracy because they're this kind of bourgeoisite middle class. They're students, uni students. They're not the typical proletarians, I would say. They're middle class, not middle class in the sense that they like are petty bourgeois, but middle class in the sense of their income and in the sense of their living standards. Most of them are still proletarians, but heavily bought by imperialism and consumerism, and in general have this petty bourgeois brain virus. So in Germany, for us, the Greens are like hated, hated by everyone. Every single real proletarian hates the Greens. That it's like the enemy for most people because it represents the most disgusting, most hideous form of liberalism. And I don't know much about the Greens in Britain, but from what you've said, it's more like what we have here with Die Linke, the left. But if we talk about environmentalism, I think it's kind of a not not it hurts more than it helps actually, because environmentalism is a kind of um it's a kind of I don't know it's um it's a trap. It's a trap
It's like
because it
identity
eventually
politics.
leads
It's a diversion.
to people not focusing on class struggle, but more on oh no, climate change and all that stuff, which is bullshit and doesn't actually attack the working class and the working class. I'm sorry, which doesn't actually attack the bourgeois.
Yeah.
So I would say um, environmentalism is something. The Green Party in general is a controlled opposition, from what I've heard from you guys. In Germany, it's one of the main forces of imperialism and reactionaryism and balance against the working class. But in Britain, it seems more of like a controlled opposition for people to go to if they are anti-system, but like this liberal type anti-system thought, and not like genuine anti-system, which can be seen in many people in Britain, especially people who vote reform, which are just caught by their reactionary ideas and their promises of re-immigration, which eventually won't solve anything except for the many foreigners in Britain, which is true that Britain has many foreigners, but I think the communists need to explain to the people that the migration is not something that we as communists think is good, but is an agenda imposed to us by the imperialists due to their wars. So we need to tell them, if we attack Iran, there's going to be more foreigners. So we need to have a concrete stance against foreign Iran, not only because they're destroying the multipolar world order, but because it's harming them, our brotherly people in Iran, but also eventually harming us. And the people who flee aren't necessarily bad people. It's mostly that the that they can't integrate due to the policy which is inflicted to them by the government. Because it's good for a government if they foreigners integrate themselves, because you will have a kind of divided society. This divided society is better to rule because they won't talk to each other. They won't interact with each other. They think the other side is bad and the other side is evil. They won't have they won't strike together. You can like give the one a lesser wage and the other more wage, and the guy with the lesser wage, the foreigner, won't talk to the guy with more wage, won't know that he has more wage, and won't organize with them. So I think I talked a bit too much about immigration now. By immigration, you need to tell it to the British people. Immigration is not something that we as communists support, but as we strongly oppose. And I think you guys did a video on that, which I thought is very good because it explains how
I mean,
imperialism
but
is
your
the root
point,
cause of migration.
about
So I
the
think
fact
you need to
that
go to these people, the people who oppose immigration. Not necessarily all of them, because there are a lot of people who are extremely brainwashed by the right-wing controlled
can you hear
opposition.
me?
But you need to have like a Armani. Can you hear Jesse?
Oh, you're right, mate.
I didn't look. No, I can't hear him. I can't hear him.
Yeah, I just wanted
Oh,
to
no.
jump in
I can't hear him.
on your point that the Green Party is not
I'm sorry.
is not a working class party, and that's a key point. And you're right, mate.
Can you say? Can anybody say something?
Yeah, can you hear me? I think you've muted us,
Yes, I can
or
hear
you've
you.
muted your laptop or something.
So you can hear me, but I can't hear him.
Yeah, probably.
Damn.
I'm probably just gonna mute you for a bit, mate, if that's all right.
Oh, that is not good.
There we go. I hope he doesn't hate me too much for just muting his ass. Yeah. It's my turn anyway. The point I'm making is that Armani's right, that the Green Party is fundamentally not a working class party, unless you could possibly make the exception in the fact that the Greens did successfully make inroads in the Muslim working class community. But I'd also argue that's because we didn't stand. And we would have had that base. So Hannah Spencer completely dismissed us standing down as a factor in her victory when it absolutely was. We have an elected councillor in Gorton and Denton, in Longside. And Hannah won, but not by a huge margin. I mean, 4,000 votes, like, it's good, but us standing there definitely made a difference. I'd argue that if we didn't stand there, that would have been an easy reform victory, in my view. So I think she should have had a bit more grace to acknowledge us standing down as a factor. So the working class Muslims voted for the Greens, primarily, in my view, because they absolutely did not want a party as hostile to the Muslim community as Reform to win in that seat. So that is a key factor here. Now, the point about the lack of working class appeal from the Greens, the Greens were not founded through the trade union movement like the Labour Party was. And that is very much determined by, that determines the, middle class, petty bourgeois orientation. Now, Hannah's victory speech made no mention to the environment or climate change. So that tells me that the Greens are trying to orient themselves more leftward to win over the working class vote. There's still a lot to be done in that regard. But that is why, in my view, we should use them as a tool to achieve those objectives, to block reform and to smash the Labour Party. Because the Workers' Party, we have, I'd argue, our politics has broad appeal. But there are still seats where we just wouldn't win, like Brighton Pavilion, Bristol, the wokey university towns. And I'm very happy for the Greens to have at it in those seats, because they're just not our target demographic. And that's why we need to use them for those ends. And at the very least, it shakes up the pond in the enemy camp. That's really my thinking.
I think this idea about splitting the enemy camp, that's a valid one, and we should be splitting the enemy forces, and we do need the Labour Party gone, because that's the party which has the links with the trade unions, and that's really damaging, because it makes all of our trade unions, they're these kind of toothless entities that aren't actually leveraging any real power like they used to. What we don't want is for them then to latch themselves onto the Green Party and for the Greens to become the new controlled opposition, which is defanging the Labour movement or whatever. And that's absolutely possible because they make every concession to capitalism and every concession to the bourgeoisie. And the closer they get to power, the fewer principles they'll have, whatever kind of rhetoric they're using. I think Armani came in on a good point, kind of talking about the positions on Iran. So maybe we should kind of move to that bit. But, especially, like, it was really interesting to see the split in statements on the bombing of Iran from, for example, Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. I thought that was really interesting, and maybe we can pull up Nigel Farage's tweet to start with. I think someone is just going to find it. But Nigel Farage was basically, he was full-throated support for Labour's actions, you know, being total lapdog. There you go. Being total lapdog to the United States, saying the Prime Minister needs to change his mind on the use of our military bases and back the Americans in this vital fight against Iran. So that was, and Tommy Robinson totally joining in on this, right? You know, these are people who are kind of alienating their working class base by aligning themselves with the establishment. And then you have people like Rupert Lowe, who is saying, look, Britain's completely broken. Why are we focusing on other countries? Why are we dropping bombs on other countries? We need to be, you know, focusing on fixing Britain here. Now, obviously, he's a right-wing conservative, and he's got conservative solutions to the problem, which we can kind of expose. But we can definitely see that Nigel Farage is again one of these politicians who, the closer he gets to power, the more he's just becoming the new leader of the Tory party, isn't he? Like, he was very skeptical on the Ukraine war, for example, and now I think he's full-throated support for Zelensky.
Yeah.
You know, I was having this conversation in the RMT conference that I was at last weekend. And what surprises people is to the extent to which Reform are pivoting, and they haven't even got elected into power yet. Like, they control some councils, but that's it. They haven't even got into government, and they're already pivoting so quickly. I mean, Trump didn't even 180 like this quickly. I mean, he only 180'd after coming to power, but Reform aren't even in the corridors of power, really. And they're already making these huge concessions. They've already appointed top former Tories from the last government to be in their new cabinet. So it's crazy. So this obviously creates ideal conditions, really, for a force like Restore Britain, an even harder right-wing force. But the real dividing line in this context is what force in British politics opposes Britain's involvement in American bombing in Iran. It's not even like an anti-imperialist coalition. It's not even necessarily an anti-war coalition, but it's just an anti-interventionist position on this particular theatre of conflict. And that is why I would work from all the way from someone from Restore Britain to the Greens on that specific issue. And that's why I referenced Iran when I was talking about the Gorton and Denton by-election. I think it's worth being open to working with those forces to at least build up a movement of anti-interventionism. I want the blue-haired feminists marching alongside the right-wing skinheads on these anti-war marches. Because at the very least, we would force the government to not intervene in this particular theatre of war. So that's my thinking, and the tweet caused so much provocation, but people just don't realize that I mean, it just shows you that the communist movement is still caught up in this cancel culture mentality, and they really do underestimate to what kind of concessions that we as communists will need to make to block imperialist intervention abroad. But guys, unpack this. I want to hear your thoughts.
I think we need to talk about what will actually stop this war. What is going to stop this war is not statements on social media. What is going to stop this war isn't a kind of electoral alliance. Like, that's not going to stop the war. What's not going to stop this war is mobilizing 1 million people to march in the streets and wave their placards and say we oppose this war. Right? That was the Iraq War march, and that should be a lesson that we as communists and socialists should have learned from the Iraq War, and that was over 20 years ago now, but people still haven't learned these lessons. You still have these very Trotskyist, revisionist dominated groups like Stop the War, whose ultimate contributions to the anti-war struggle here in Glasgow is to get a bunch of people to gather at Buchanan Steps and say, down with this sort of thing, we oppose this sort of thing, right? And then nothing happens. The ruling class is very, very happy for that to be the extent of people's opposition to warmongering. What we really need to be doing as communists is focusing on where are the real leverage points in our society and in our economy. What are the material contributions that Britain is making to this war? Where are those places where we should be organizing workers to actually materially resist what's happening? That's what allowed the workers' movement to make interventions on imperialism 100 years ago without being in government. That was how the workers' movement, I think it was in the 1920s, via they managed to push the labor leadership back when it was slightly less corrupt, and even the TUC to oppose the invasion of the Soviet Union, and they set up councils of action throughout the entire country, and they actually managed to push the government to end its intervention against the Soviet Union. So that was real material force, but we're so far away from that because we are absolutely building from scratch in this country, and we're disorganized, and you have trade union leaders like Sharon Graham saying how we need to we need more jobs in the arms industry, and we need more funds for the arms industry. There's so much work to do, but we absolutely have to focus on giving our trade unions back their leverage, and that means killing the Labour Party, right?
Well, and therein lies the huge question, is that we're so far away from that point of organizing workers to take that kind of action. So my talk of these alliances and these electoral pacts is really based on building ourselves to that point, or at the very least, building such movements supplements direct action taken by workers in the choke points of our economy, because it always helps when you are backed up by a popular movement, and that's unfortunately why a lot of direct action fails, is because they're not backed up by popular upheaval. So both need to come in tandem. Sami, come on in.
No, I was just going to say Eben's examples of sort of material action that we can take are great, but I think we can also look at even more recent examples in other countries in Europe, and despite them not being as effective because they were on a small scale, that's really what kind of where our inspiration should be taken from, at least on the. I mean, we live in that same period of time, right? So I'm referring to like the Italian dock workers in Genova, who went on strike, and they refused to load ships bound for Israel carrying armaments or fuel or whatever it was. And I think that can only happen if we build even small-scale connections, if we start making connections locally with various industries, whether it's, I mean, Britain used to have a big shipbuilding industry, not so much anymore, but still a decent amount of manufacturing is carried out in some areas. If we can make those connections in industry, able and we are able to instill a certain form of, I mean, consciousness, like you said, it already exists, but more in the what kind of direct action you can take as a sort of unionized working class in a new way. I think British trade unions are massive and large, but they're largely useless. So if we can, bring back the sort of collective strike action in an actual effective material way, like in Italy or like in France, it will be very, very useful.
Well, I think that's the key thing is how do we transform our unions? And I think Eben's right, is that one of the first steps is that we need to sever the ties between the trade union movement and the Labour Party. It's no coincidence why the RMT is at the lead of the trade union movement. It lies very much in its industrial strength, but also the fact that it hasn't tied itself to the electoral fortunes of the Labour Party. So there's a lot to be learned in that for sure. And it is totally disgraceful that Sharon Graham and Unite the Union have the political line that war and genocide puts foods on the workers' table. It's a very short-sighted, petty trade unionist view that doesn't actually appreciate the fact that the more we enslave other countries, the more we bomb other countries, that just forges the chains of workers at home. Mm-hmm. And you see that with Britain's complicity in the genocide in Gaza, is that anyone who speaks out against genocide, anybody who tries to build up a meaningful opposition to Zionism, is branded as an anti-Semite in this country and is criminalized. Human beings cannot help but to have love and compassion for brothers and sisters across the world. And the Palestinians are no exception. So you just need to look at someone like Miss Rachel from America, a lady who does all the kindergarten videos for children. Because she says something simple like, stop killing children, stop bombing children, stop maiming little children, she's branded as an anti-Semite. To have any sympathy for children who lose their limbs, lose their family, who starve to death, brands you are automatically branded as being a bad faith actor and an anti-Semite. And that really is the crux as to the connection between our imperialist aggression abroad and the clampdown on our civil liberties here at home.
I think I couldn't have put it better. And it's not just about the amount of funds that are sent abroad, whether it's Starmer committing billions a year to Ukraine, or helping and aiding Israel in running spy flights across Gaza, which cost the taxpayer millions of pounds. But it's also, again, direct clampdown, like you're saying, on our civil liberties completely.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the attack itself? Sami, did you prep a briefing on what's happening?
I mean, I can give you a rundown off the top of my head mainly, but so Iran, I don't know how early I should start. I could start from the Islamic Revolution of 79, but in essence, Iran's revolution happened in 79, in which it was a popular revolution which overthrew the Western-backed Shah, which himself was whose power was greatly expanded after the overthrow of Mossadegh in the 50s, after Mossadegh nationalized Iranian oil. And the British had a deep interest in overthrowing him because of this, due to the fact that they were jointly running a company called the Anglo-Persian Oil Company in the 50s. And once Mossadegh took power and he nationalized this the oil in Iran, the British and the CIA staged a coup, and British Petroleum was born out of that. So now what is BP came directly from the coup in Iran in the 50s. And after, roughly, I think, 20 years of Shah rule, the Iranian people rose up and overthrew, in a very sort of broad popular front of communists, socialists, Islamic radicals, sort of Islamic scholars, and the Khomeini faction came out on top and took power, and ultimately the left forces in Iran have either become very, very weak or tools of Western imperialism. And Iran has been one of the most sanctioned nations on earth since this revolution. The overthrow of the Islamic Revolution has always been on the cards for the West. Netanyahu has been advocating about it for 30 years, roughly. How can I put this? Okay, and more recently, I guess, you have had, clashes between Israel and there was the invasion of Lebanon in the 80s. And Hezbollah in Lebanon is viewed as an Iranian proxy. So Israel has been desperately calling for the overthrow of Iran because it sees it as its main threat and rival in the Middle East, and the mastermind, the brain behind the operations of Hamas and Hezbollah, and all other proxies, and the Houthis. They claim the Houthis are run by Iran. And finally, they got what they wanted. So last week, they, after a few other skirmishes in the past, 12-day war and so on, they finally got what they wanted, which was that the United States would aid them in a strike against Iran directly. And so, was it Friday night? They fired and bombed a children's school in Tehran, or not Tehran, but another Iranian city, killing 160 school-age girls. And Iran actually, very surprisingly, responded very, very swiftly, which was not something that happened during the 12-day war. And now that we've had exchanges of missiles back and forth for the last 3 or 4 days, the Iranian supreme leader was martyred, which I guess the Trump administration was hoping would bring a swift end to the war and the Iranian regime would simply just collapse. This hasn't happened, obviously, and now Trump is speaking about 4 weeks. And I defer back to what Has said in one of his streams, which was that if the Iranians can hold out 4 weeks, it will be a victory for them. And I sincerely hope that happens.
They're dug in for a protracted war. So Israeli Defense Intelligence reported that, I was reading it in the Financial Times, that they're moderating, like the rate of fire from these ballistic missiles has gone down, but they're more constant now. So Iran is definitely dug in for a protracted fight. So this is going to last for many, many days to come. The impacts on global supply chains are going to be horrendous. So good luck to the Greens for trying to appeal to working class voters with their net zero crap. Look, if you want green policies, go for policies that working people are actually going to like communist policies that don't even like talk about fucking climate change or any of that shit. They're the real green policies. Free bus travel, a fully integrated public transport system, get cars off the road. A more spread industrial base, so it's not packed into one geographical area. Equitable development across the land, like that. Those are real green environmental policies, sustainable policies. You just need to look at the Soviet Union for that kind of stuff. I'm just going to dig in some of these comments now. There's a pretty cool function on this. So we're literally getting to grips with StreamYard and all the mechanics of it. So I can just put up a comment like this. So this guy's from Planetoid Pluto. and he's been tuning in. He's been tuning in tonight and commenting a lot. So fair play to him. So let's see. What do you guys think about Venezuela? Do you agree with Haz that Delcy sold off or nah? So I mean, it's not looking good, guys, is it? Oh, by the way, guys, we got Paul Cockshott coming in 5 minutes. So I know you guys are like gnashing at the teeth. It's gonna happen. Don't worry. It's 5 minutes. We're gonna have a very juicy interview, but it's not looking good. Iran is looking very closely at what's happening in Venezuela because the United States have copied and pasted their strategy in Venezuela to Iran. So Venezuela has passed a law in the National Assembly to privatize their oil, exactly what the United States wanted. And unfortunately, that plays very much into the hands of the United States. A complete and utter regime change operation would have been counterproductive if harvesting oil from Venezuela was what they wanted, because you would have had another situation like they had in Iraq, where they couldn't extract a drop of oil from Iraq because oil companies would have just been harassed by Iraqi militias. Likewise, they would have been harassed by Venezuelan militias. So if you bring in an interim government with the pretense of legitimacy after having decapitated Maduro and coerce them somehow or bribe them to pass a law, then they've just managed to get the Venezuelan government to do their job for them.
Jesse, can I jump in quickly? Has there been any updates on the laws? Because last I checked, they hadn't actually passed a privatization law. I mean, this was a few weeks ago. The Venezuelan state still has to own 51% of all oil joint enterprises, from what I know. Although I'm a bit behind on my Venezuelan news, and so this has meant that the US has had to purchase Venezuelan oil at still not full price, and then they've been able to ship it to places like Israel. So the problem is that Venezuela has no more control over where that oil goes. But I think what we need to focus on the most is that statement that was put out yesterday, I think it was, not mentioning the US or Israel in their attack against Iran, but actually condemning Iran for their retaliatory strikes against the Middle Eastern Gulf states, which to me was absolutely insane. Now, the good news is that they retracted it. I think this was just due to massive pressure from Venezuelan collectives, average Venezuelans, the young sort of PSUV membership. But I found that very, very concerning. And the recent Delcy tweet was saying how she expresses solidarity with Qatar, and I'm like, you haven't mentioned Iran once and how they were attacked. So now I wonder. At first, I was convinced that no, Maduro was not sold out. Simply, I guess they were way more incapable militarily than we thought, and they couldn't retaliate against the United States. But now I'm thinking, did they sell him out because these moves are not promising at all? So I think the game is still wait and see with Venezuela. I'm leaning more towards the sold out, or at least, the very least, a complete capitulation and fear. But I think it's very much a wait and see game still.
Okay. Well, look, I think we're out of time anyway, so let's park that for the next stream. But a lot can change in the next stream, and let's get Paul Cockshott on. The moment you've all been waiting for. I'll just take us out.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Hi, Paul. How you doing?
Okay.
I'll just introduce you, and so to everybody who doesn't know, today we're very lucky to be joined by Paul Cockshott, who's the author of Towards a New Socialism and How the World Works. He's a renowned Marxist economist, computer scientist, theoretician, and most importantly, a red-blooded communist. So how are you doing, Paul?
Well as can be expected at my age, put it that way.
Good enough. So getting right into it, I know that you've been watching the news a lot lately, seeing all of the developments in the Middle East. Obviously, we adapted one of your scripts for CYCLONE, which was on the world crisis.
Yeah.
So my first question was based on these. What are your thoughts on this latest development in the breakdown of the global order?
Well, when I wrote that, I hadn't anticipated I think I wrote it before the Israelis and Americans were able to prevail in Syria. And that has shifted the strategic balance significantly. I also didn't anticipate the complete abandonment of all international law by the United States and Israel. The things they're doing at the moment of systematically assassinating heads of state, now today bombing the clergy in Iran, which is sort of, for analogies, it would be like bombing the conclave that was choosing a new pope, or killing King Charles and then killing off the Archbishop of Canterbury so they couldn't crown a new one. I mean, the people who, these are crazy policies. If you did that if Jews murdered the Pope and then the College of Cardinals, there'd be an outrageous mass of anti-Semitism across the world. If they did that, what I just described in Britain, even people who aren't monarchists would be aghast at the attack and would oppose it. So I hadn't anticipated the sheer ruthlessness with which they were openly going to behave as fascists. This is something we haven't seen since Imperial Japan, really. This attack on countries to seize their resources by naked force really hasn't happened since 1945. And I hadn't anticipated how ruthless it was going to be. Now, the question is, are they in a position to succeed? And this is a very difficult thing to judge, because we don't know how well hidden and covered the stocks of munitions that Iran has are, how securely mosaiced is their command and control system, how localized are their links to Baidu in order to get precise targeting in the absence of central facilities in Tehran. I mean, we don't know these things. However, the fact that they have been able to accurately hit targets in the Gulf states and in Israel within an hour or two of being attacked themselves indicates that they have substantial redundancy in their command and control system. The extent to which they have significant stocks that they can use, I don't know. We do know that the American stocks of anti-aircraft missiles and the American stocks of JASM and Tomahawk missiles are comparatively small. It sounds a lot. I mean, when I last did a calculation of their stocks, they had about 2,000 readily available JASMs and a bit under that of Tomahawks. Now, that sounds quite a lot, but when you think they're going to want to hold some over in case they get into a conflict from China, the stocks they have are minuscule compared to what they would require in a war with China. Their air force in terms of the number of bomber planes that America now has, it has shrunk to the scale of the RAF in the mid-1960s. It's nothing like what it once was. So their ability to carry out a prolonged war at the end of a long logistics chain is probably not there. The question is whether they can do enough destruction to not Venezuelan, the Iranian state in a short period of time that it won't be a long war. What we don't know is have accurate information about the balance of political forces within Iran. We know that most of what you hear on the news is heavily biased and selective, but we don't really know what the scale of mobilizable opposition to the state in Iran is. It's likely that a lot of the leadership of such opposition, especially the leadership that was tied into Mossad and the CIA, was blown in the riots that occurred some months ago at the start of January. But we shouldn't underestimate the possibility that there's a substantial block of monarchists within the country who might be mobilizable. It seems less likely to me that a faction of the state apparatus will play the role that the vice president played in Venezuela. Too many of them have been attacked. Too many civilians have been killed. All of this will tend to accentuate nationalist feeling and make it considerably harder for them to back down. So I wouldn't expect the ability to subvert the state internally. What I don't know is whether the precision munitions the Americans have is sufficient to target enough of the state apparatus to make it non-functional. But on the other hand, Iran's a very large country. In terms of population and area, it's 2 to 3 times Ukraine. And Ukraine has taken heavier missile bombardment for 4 years now without the state collapsing. Obviously, that was conditional on continuing support from NATO countries. And what's not clear is the extent to which, if this conflict persists, whether China and possibly Russia will ship in supplies overland, no, I shouldn't say ship in, truck in or rail in supplies overland to Iran. If that's the case, the conflict will become an attrition conflict, which is very hard for the Americans to win because they're not in a position to launch a land invasion. And if Chinese industry is behind the Iranians, then they can't outproduce them. But I don't know enough about the political statements and policies that the Chinese government or the Russian government are taking at the moment to know whether that is actually going to happen.
Do you think there's any sign of, this is another thing that you mentioned in the world crisis, talking about the split in the imperialist camp, that former relationships could turn against each other. Obviously there's been a lot of developments which you predicted around Greenland. We're seeing a lot of people, a lot of countries who are very supportive of the Iraq war, for example, who are kind of looking at what's happening in Iran, and they're seeing it as quite a rogue act by the United States. So I'm not sure there's much support for this war from the imperialist camp. Do you think that there's scope for a breakdown in the imperialist camp? Like, and in that situation, what side do you think the United Kingdom would take?
I don't give much credence to the ability of any Western European country other than Spain to resist what the Americans are doing. For a moment, I thought Starmer might do it, but he only lasted 24 hours. The fact that he's now being ridiculed by Trump is not going to help the Americans, I think, because if there's one thing which could win an element of support for Starmer, it's standing up to Trump. But he's shown no ability to do that in the past, so I wouldn't expect that. At the moment, it looks very much as if the bulk of the conflict is going to be done by the Americans and Israelis. I can't see any European country being willing to supply actual troops on the ground in the way that happened in the Iraq War, or the first Iraq War, or the second Iraq War. But it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen even a couple of days hence.
Before you joined, we were also talking about the state of the anti-war movement in Britain. We were saying it basically doesn't exist at the moment. The trade unions are completely defanged, for example, and then we have, a lot of new actors in the political landscape in Britain. We've got your party, we've got Green Party emerging. Communists are very split. I was wondering what your understanding is about the kind of balance of those forces in Britain. What should be the role that socialists and communists are playing? And obviously, drawing on your own experiences, I think you're still a member of the CPB. I think.
Yeah, the situation, I think, is changing very quickly. The Labour Party people who moved over into your party look to me as if they've largely blown it. They've lost the initiative to the Greens. Given the first past the post system, effectively you can only have one left-wing party standing, and the smaller one will get squeezed out, and we're seeing that neither them nor the Workers' Party put up a significant thing in the last by-election. So I'm dubious about the long-term prospect for your party. I don't know what the long-term prospect of the Workers' Party is. They have distinguished themselves ideologically more from the Greens, so there may be an environmental niche they can fit into, which ideologically I don't see there's enough of a distinction between the Your Party people and the Greens for the Your Party people to be a realistic competitor. But what you say about the absence of an anti-war movement is very striking. I mean, it's not just the failure of the trade unions. Even in Scotland, during the first and the second Iraq wars, there were big demonstrations in George Square as the war started, called in part by the SNP, which got a lot of people, and SNP speakers spoke against it. And the SNP essentially has been destroyed as an anti-British state party. It's become. It defends some local Scottish interests and the interests of the managerial class here, but it's not the kind of nationalist movement that it was at the time of the First Iraq War. So that if you look at Winney's statement on it, it's totally different from what Alex Salmond was saying at the time.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to switch gears a little bit because I also wanted to talk about your books. Towards a New Socialism came out quite a while ago.
A long time ago, yeah.
A long time ago. But I'm rereading it at the moment, and I still think a lot of the ideas are very relevant. You talk a little bit about some of the mistakes, or I don't know how you, mistakes of the former socialist project, and the ways that we could address them in future socialist attempts, particularly relying on new technologies and modern day technologies. Something which socialists and communists are really bad at is that they're extremely technophobic, and it feels like that a lot of them today are living 100 years ago still. So what was exciting about Towards a New Socialism is you were actually talking about, how can we plan a large scale economy using what were then, modern computers. So I suppose, I just want you to kind of come in on that.
The technology is obviously much better now, so it's much easier. Things which required major national computing resources now could be done in any one of a multitude of data centers. So that's not the technology's there. There's very little of the things that we advocate in there, either economically or politically, that I would withdraw from now. I can't think of anything particularly. So I think the context is different, obviously, because it was written about 89, 90, when Gorbachev was in power, and our plan was to get it translated and published in the Soviet Union first. And Alan was living in the Soviet Union at the time, but he wasn't able to get anyone that he was in contact with there that would publish it. He met someone who I suspect may have been Veduta towards the end of the time he was there, but that was just when he was leaving the country. And I went to Hungary to meet Zsuzsa Ferge, who I thought was a possible person who might support it. And this was before the counter-revolution in Hungary, just before it. And I was surprised that someone who I had expected to be still a socialist was effectively had become a liberal and had no interest in in advising me where to publish this kind of stuff. So in the end, these things only got translated into Hungarian and Russian years later. But the thing about the context is that, excuse me a moment, the thing about the context is that we were writing for an audience that was in the Eastern European countries. So we were assuming you already had nationalized industry and publicly owned industry. And it was a question of how could it be run more efficiently? How could you secure the political superstructure in a more effective way than the state structure they had at the time? So that was the conjuncture it was aimed at. Now, that means that it's not an immediate transition program for countries like Britain. And one has to think of intermediate steps through which the economy could go before you'd reach that level.
I only had one more question that I wanted to ask you, and that's mainly based on the people that I assume are going to be watching this live stream. But have your opinions changed at all on whether you believe that baristas are working class?
No, I mean there's a question of whether people are productive laborers or not. That's the first question. And second question is, what is their degree of organization and perception of their situation? Now, it's clearly the nature of the firms that employ them is that they are lots of small branches. So the individual people are in a relatively isolated position. The number of employees at a Starbucks working at any one time might be 4 or 5. So it's not even like people working in a big department store. I mean, people working in a big department store aren't productive, but they are in a large group, and therefore it's easier for unions to organize among them. People working in Starbucks are in small units, and that makes it much more difficult to establish trade union organization there. But it doesn't mean that the catering trade in general can't have trade union organization. And historically, you have had unions operating in the catering trade.
No, well answered. I think for me, it's you know, a lot of it is a question of labels. It's all right to talk about, you know, different sections of the working class and their different motivations and interests, you know, without denying the fact that, you know, organizing these kind of small coffee shops is useful to the small number of workers living in them. To kind of go on, I wanted to bring the team back in actually and see if anybody else had any questions for you, and also anybody who's actually in the comment section, if you have any questions for Paul, type them in and we'll ask it. And thanks again for joining us, Paul. It's brilliant.
Thank you, Paul. Really enjoyed it myself. So my only question is, what's next? What are you working on these days?
Oh, what I'm writing at the moment is actually a book on computer programming as geometry.
All right.
I alternate between doing stuff on computing and doing stuff on economics. So I couldn't think of any, after doing the book Defending Materialism, I decided I was going to write 1 or 2 more computer science books.
Yeah, I've got this app on my phone, and I'm kind of doing some math problems and computer science problems. So I'll get myself as clued up as I can on that, and then I'll have a good crack at your book. I think that's
well, it's going to be called something like Vectors Programming as Geometry, something like that.
Right. Yeah. I definitely need to brush up on. I got a C in math GCSE, but like that's I'm incidentally use examples from economic planning, among other things, in it. Good stuff. All right, nice one. Sami, do you have any questions, man?
No, I'm actually very much looking forward to the. Mainly wondering when, if there is sort of a timeline for the release of that book, because it sounds very interesting.
Well, I'm writing the last chapter. The problem is at the moment to get Springer to whether they will agree to publish it. They're being very slow with the review process, and if I don't get any joy with that, I may self-publish. Yeah.
Okay, I'll look forward to it.
Cool. Well, I can't see any questions in the comment section, so we could wrap up early if we all like. So, guys, thank you very much for joining us. All I can say now is join our Discord space where you will get access to our study group. Happens on a weekly basis, every Thursday evening. The more we populate that study space, the more study groups that we can eventually have to accommodate people's varying schedules. And please subscribe to our Patreon. We do rely on your very generous donations to keep this gig running. As you can imagine, this operation does cost a fuckload of money. How do you think I got my chair? No, actually, no, I've paid for this chair out of my own money, out of my own pocket. So your money does get spent very well, I can assure you. And most importantly, do tune in to the X space on the Workers' Party of Britain, the Doctor's Space, where Chris Williamson again will be speaking to the famous doctor, Dr. Rame Aladwan. There'll be a very good conversation about the state of the NHS and the state of the Middle East, both of which aren't looking too pretty. So thanks again for joining us and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, comrades. Thanks, Paul. Bye.